Shabbat Shalom. Let's do a song without words, okay? Goes like this. Gotta follow me. First part goes like this. Yada da 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 da, yada da 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 da, yada da 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 da. Okay. Yada da 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 da, yada da 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 da, yada da 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 da. Yada da 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 da, yada da 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 da, yada da 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 da. Next part, yada da da da, yada da 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 da, yada da 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 da, yada da 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 da. First time, yada da da da, yada da 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 da, yada da 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 da. Da 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 da. You think it's over? No. Ya da 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 da, ya da 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 da. Try that. Ya da 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 da, ya da 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 da. Ya da 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 da. Ya da 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 da. Ya da 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 da. Ya da 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 da. Ya da 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 da. So for those of you who are musical, that's A B A C D C D B. Okay, it looks like you know what you're doing. Let's do it again. Ya da 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 da, ya da 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 da, da 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 da, ya da 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 da, ya da 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 da, ya da 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 da, ya da 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 da, ya da 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 da. Ya da 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 da. Ya da 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 da. Ya da 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 da. Ya da 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 da. I know those of you online are singing really loud with us, and maybe you can hear us singing here. Welcome. Ya da 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 da. Ya da 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 da. Ya da 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 da. Ya da 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 da. Ya da 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 da. Ya da 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 da. Ya da 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 da. Ya da 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 da. Ya da 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 da. Ya da 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 da, ya da 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 da, ya da 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 da. Welcome again, Shabbat Shalom. Nice to see you all here tonight. I want to see. I hope you took a prayer book when you came in. If you didn't, there's some in the back. I'm going to invite us to turn to page 120 in the prayer book. And I want to invite Amy Leader to light our Shabbat candles. And then we'll welcome the Sabbath with a few songs and prayers and be together. So on page 120. invite you to turn to page 142. We'll sing the song to welcome the angels of the Most High, to maybe open up a little space to welcome a message of peace, the message of shalom. And this hymn has 4 verses. One of welcome and acknowledgement. A second, invitation, Boachem l'shalom, inviting that spirit into ourselves. A third, Barchuni l'shalom, asking for blessing, asking to be blessed with peace. And then the fourth, Seitchem l'shalom, sending the Sabbath spirit and blessings on their way around the world to share the blessing. Shalom Aleichem, Malachei Hasharet, Malachei Elyon, Melech Malachei Hamlachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Boachem l'shalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Elyon. Melech Malachei Hamalachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Barchuni l'shalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Elyon. Melech Malachei Hamlachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Tzitchem l'shalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Elyon. Melech Malachei Hamalachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And turning back to page 138, we'll welcome the Sabbath with Lecha Dodi. We're going to sing verses 1 and 2, and then verse 9. Verse 2, 1 and 2 on page 138, and then verse 9 on 139. And the custom is on the last verse to rise and to face the door and to do a little bit of a bow, as we imagine as we greet the Sabbath bride, the Sabbath spirit. A lot of melodies for Lecha Dodi. I'm going to do one that we've been doing recently in the congregation. I know that not all of you know it, but the chorus is pretty easy. Lecha Dodi likrat kala, Pnei Shabbat nekabla. O Lecha Dodi likrat kala, Pnei Shabbat nekabla. Let's try that. O Lecha Dodi likrat kala, Pnei Shabbat nekabla. O Lecha Dodi likrat kala, Pnei Shabbat nekabla. Shamor v'zachor b'dibur echad, Hishmeyanu el hamiuchad. Adonai echad u'shemo echad, l'shem u'tiferet v'letehila. O Lecha Dodi likrat kala, Pnei Shabbat nekabla. O Lecha Dodi likrat kala, Pnei Shabbat nekabla. Likrat Shabbat lechu v'nelcha, ki mekor habaracha. מקדם נסוכה, סוף מעשה במחשבה תחילה, ולך תודי לקראת קלה, פני שבת נקבלה, ולך תודי לקראת קלה, פני שבת נקבלה. Last verse, verse 9, page 139. בואי בשלום, עטרת בעלה, גם בשמחה ובצהלה, תוך אמוני עם סגולה, בואי חלה, בואי חלה, הולך דודי לקראת קלה, פני שבת נקבלה, הולך דודי לקראת קלה, פני שבת נקבלה. Turning to page 146, we remain standing for the formal call to prayer. Baruchu et Adonai HaMevorach. Baruch Adonai HaMevorach Leolam Vaed. You may be seated. On page 148, we actually have a melody for this Ma'ariv Aravim. Let's sing it together. This is a blessing of awareness of the changing of the time and the seasons. Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bidvaro Mariv Aravim b'chokhma potech she'arim ובתבונה משנה עתים מחליף את הזמנים ומסדר את הכוכבים במשמרותיהם ברקיע כרצונו בורא יום ולילה גולל אור מפני חושך וחושך מפני אור וחושך מפני אור ומעביר יום ומביא לילה ומבדיל בין יום ובין לילה אדוני צבאות שמו אל חי וקיים תמיד ימלוך עלינו לעולם ועד ברוך אתה אדוני המעריב ערבים. I'm turning the page 150. אהבת עולם בית ישראל עמך אהבת עמך אהבת תורה ומצוות חוקים ומשפטים אותנו לימדת על כן אדוני אלוהינו בשוכבנו ובקומנו נשיח בחוקיך ונשמח בדברי תורתך ובמצוותיך לעולם ועד כי הם חיינו ואורך ימינו, ובהם נהגה יומם ולילה, נהגה יומם ולילה, ואהבתך אל תסיר ממנו לעולמים. ברוך אתה אדוני, אוהב עמו ישראל. Turning to page 152. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. On page 154, let's chant this first paragraph together in the Hebrew, and then we'll read it together in the English in the middle of the page. ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודך, והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך, ושיננתם לבניך, ודיברת בם, בשבתך בביתך, ולכתך בדרך, ובשוכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם לאות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך. Together on page 154. You shall love Adonai your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. Take to heart these instructions with which I charge you this day. Impress them upon your children, recite them when you stay at home and when you are away, when you lie down and when you get up. Bind them as a sign on your hand, and let them serve as a symbol on your forehead. Inscribe them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. Thus you shall remember to observe all my commandments and to be holy to your God. I am Adonai, who brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. I am Adonai God. I want to invite us to go to page 161. We're going to sing first in English, Let There Be Love and Understanding Among Us. And then we're going to go over to the top of the page and sing the first couple lines together in the Hebrew. Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu. Let there be love and understanding among us. Let peace and friendship be our shelter from life's storms. Let there be love and understanding among us. Let peace and friendship be our shelter from life's storms. Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu, Hashkivenu Leshalom, Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu, Hashkivenu Leshalom. I'm going to ask that we read that prayer in the English at the bottom of the page. Grant, O God, that we lie down in peace and raise us up, our guardian, to life renewed. Spread over us the shelter of your peace, and guide us with your good counsel, and for your name's sake be our help. Shield and shelter us beneath the shadow of your wings. Defend us against enemies, illness, war, famine and sorrow. Distance us from wrongdoing. For you, God, watch over us and address us. For you, God, are generous and merciful. Blessed, guard our coming and going to life and peace evermore. Baruch atah Adonai, hapurei sukat shalom, aleinu, ve'al kol amo Yisrael, ve'al Yerushalayim. Baruch atah Adonai, hapurei sukat shalom, shalom aleinu, ve'al kol amo Yisrael. Ve'al Yerushalayim, ve'al kol amo, ve'al Yerushalayim, shalom. Baruch atah Adonai, hapores sukat shalom, shalom aleinu, ve'al kol amo Yisrael. Shalom aleinu, kol amo Yisrael. So we turn to page 164. Come now to the Amidah, this sort of standing prayer, which we're going to do mostly privately tonight. We're going to begin in a moment. I'll ask you to rise and sing together this invitation to prayer. Really, before we speak the formal words on the page, we offer a little intention that maybe there'll be some kind of a connection between the words on the page and the words in the heart. So we actually ask God to open our lips and that we say, "May my mouth declare your praise," meaning may I be able to find the words, even if they're words I'm not able to speak, but only maybe to hear in my heart, that express what's on my heart and what I want to bring to this moment of prayer. So we'll rise on page 164, and then I invite you to continue. We'll do the first couple blessings of the Amidah together, and then just continue privately by using this time in whatever way is working for you. Ananana svatai tifta, ananana ufi agit tehilatecha, ananana Adonai, ananana svatai tifta, ananana ufi agit tehilatecha. Adonai sefatai tiftach, ufi agit tehilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips, that my mouth may declare your praise. Page 166. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu ve'Elohei avotenu v'imotenu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, ve'Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol, Hagibor v'Hanora, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, V'konei Hakol, V'zocher Chasdei Avot v'Imahot, U'mevii Geula livnei bneihem, Leman Shemo be'ahava, Melech Ozer u'Moshia u'Magen, Baruch atah Adonai, Magen Avraham ve'Ezrat Sarah. 168. Atah Gibor le'olam Adonai, Mechayei hakol atah Rav le'Hoshia, Morid hata'ah, Mechalkel chaim bechesed, מחיי הכל ברחמים רבים, סומך נופלים ורופא חולים, ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר. מי כמוך בעל גבורות, ומי דומה לך, מלך ממית ומחיה, ומצמיח ישועה, ונאמן אתה להחיות הכל. ברוך אתה אדוני, מחיי המתים. Page 170. אתה קדוש ושמך קדוש, וקדושים בכל יום יהללוך סלה. ברוך אתה אדוני, האל הקדוש. I invite you to continue privately with the words on the page or whatever comes into the heart. So if you're still praying, don't let me stop you. If you've finished your prayer, you may be seated. And on the bottom of page 80, let's close this prayer together with a prayer for peace. Ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la. Oh, say shalom bimroma. Oh, yaseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'al kol yoshvei tevel, ve'imru, amen. Ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la. And I want to offer some prayers for healing. Do the Misha Beirach. If you want the words, it's on page 109. I think most of us know it, but I did want to invite, if anybody wishes to mention the name of a person for whom we are praying for healing, or you are praying, you want to mention out loud or privately, please do so. pass my hand over the congregation. So we sing together, Mishabbat. Mishabbat Avotenu Mekor HaBracha Leimotenu. May the source of strength, who bless the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say Amen. Misheberach imotenu mekor habracha lavotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, renewal of body, renewal of spirit, and let us say Amen. Amen. So, as some of you know, I recently returned from a trip to Israel. I was there for about 10 days at the end of June, mostly visiting friends and family to see them, let them know that we're thinking of them in these times, and to hear their thoughts, and more importantly, maybe to let them express themselves to me. I was curious about their thoughts about what's going on now, the current situation, the war, the government, the future. I visited the kibbutz where I lived for 7 years, Gezer, and also traveled to Tel Aviv and Jerusalem and to Nazareth. Some of these visits were kind of along the order of condolence calls, to be with friends of my dear friend Vivian Silver, the peace activist from Kibbutz Be'eri, whose home was overrun and destroyed on October 7th. She was originally thought to have been taken hostage in Gaza, though later it was confirmed that she was burned to death in her home. The positive ID was actually made from the DNA of a small bone fragment that was discovered by archaeologists when they made a second sweep with more sophisticated equipment through the dust and ashes of her home. And also to give a hug to my friend Lee Siegel, who lived on the kibbutz a couple houses down from me when I lived there in Gezer, whose brother Keith was kidnapped from another kibbutz, Kfar Aza, and who is still a hostage and hopefully still alive. I also took a 3-day vacation with my friends to stay in a guest house in the city of Nazareth, which is a majority Arab town in the north of Israel. We chose to go there because it's sort of a different corner of Israel, traditional Arab food and customs, and also in part to lend some support to that sector of the population which finds itself in a very difficult position again, as high emotions and hateful rhetoric fly around, and they feel especially scrutinized for their sympathies and loyalties. This is not going to be an investigative report or a news report. My remarks do not pretend to represent the whole spectrum of thinking in Israel. I spoke mostly with people who have been part of the left and the center in Israel. Most of them have been active for many years in projects for Israeli-Palestinian coexistence, or activists in what we would call shared society organizations in Israel. Neither will I be able to provide any kind of objective version of the truth about the war in Gaza. You might be forgiven for thinking, if all you read are the newspapers here, that the only newsworthy question is, why is Israel committing so much harm on innocent Palestinians? Why are they such monsters? It's a conversation and a frame that focuses almost completely on the actions of the Israeli military and the resulting and serious humanitarian tragedy that is happening there. But Israelis generally understand that this is a war against Hamas, who are not civilians, but rather a formidable and armed military force which took the initiative to break the ceasefire on October 7th, carry out and film and document horrifying war crimes and slaughter. They mostly see it as a war they did not choose, in a way that they did not choose, in a place that they did not choose, and against some who have resisted attempts to reach an agreement to end the war by freeing the hostages. And they're mystified a little bit at how uncurious people in the West seem to be about reporting on or critiquing Hamas and its actions, their objections, their ideology, their leaders, their political objectives, because to Israelis, Hamas is very real, and they perceive it as a real threat to their security. None of this is to diminish in any way the horror of the hunger and the displacement and the death and the destruction that have certainly been the result of this war, some of which they are aware of and some of which they are not. But I can share what I experienced and maybe some stories you might not get from reading the newspaper reports. Though life goes on, Israel is definitely a country at war. In Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, classes and work are back in session, restaurants are open. Still, at the beginning of every public event, announcements are made reminding people of where to go and what to do in case the rockets come in the next half hour or hour. If I could summarize the biggest difference between the way the conflict is talked about and thought about on this side of the Atlantic and on the other, it would be this. In Israel, it's all about the hostages. The kidnapping and return of the hostages are the open wound, the beginning and sometimes the end of conversations and of people's reasoning and of the way that they think about the present and the future. First of all, everybody knows these people. Even people who didn't know them personally before October 7th now recognize their names and their faces. People know the stories about them as if they're personal friends, and in many cases, Israel being a small country, they are personal friends. Second, with every day that goes by, there's an increasing fear that some of them will not return. I just read today that of the 116 who are still missing, it's already presumed that at least 42 may already be dead. They've also heard some of the stories about what life was like in Gaza for the 100 hostages who were freed in November, and they imagine the same for those who are still held hostage there. A friend of mine, Lee Siegel, who lived 2 houses down from me on Gezer, has a brother in Gaza. And he has kind of become a spokesperson for the Hostage Families Forum, a group that's made up of relatives, close relatives of the hostages. You may have seen him, he's always on CNN because he's an American and he's interviewed and he speaks well, very, very slowly and deliberately. Lee goes once a week to the Knesset, Israel's parliament, where the hostage families actually have a pass to enter the building and permission to attend all committee meetings going on at the Knesset. Any business, any meeting that's going on, they have a pass to enter. And they go to these meetings to make their case personally to lawmakers, to encourage them to do everything they can to reach an agreement and bring back the hostages. Some are friendly to them, some are hostile, some support them privately but not in public, and some seem annoyed by their continuous presence. At this point, though, the majority of the hostage families have come to the conclusion that there is now a choice between reaching an agreement to bring back their loved ones and ending the war, even with some very painful concessions, and between the government's stated goal to eliminate Hamas and solve the problems of Gaza once and for all. And in that choice, many of them feel that the hostages have taken second place, and they've become very critical of the government, which they fear has abandoned them even from the very first days of the war. Now, they're not a unanimous group. There are some among the hostage families who say things like, "I'm prepared to sacrifice my loved ones if it means the end of Hamas." There are others who, believe it or not, say we should keep fighting and even occupy Gaza again. But the vast majority of them are united around the slogan, Iska Achshav, which means a deal now. And this majority holds a mass rally for the hostages every week in Tel Aviv, every single Saturday night. And I went to it the first week that I was there. What I didn't know is that about half an hour before the rally begins, the Israel Reform Movement has started holding a very large public Havdalah service in an adjacent square, the large plaza outside the Tel Aviv Museum. And there are prayers and songs and poetry, some words of Torah about the portion of the week, and messages from relatives of the hostages. People bring Havdalah candles from home, spices from their garden to pass around. And my friend Keith is often invited to say a few words if he is there. And then people move to the main rally, which consists almost every week of between 40 and 50,000 people. The streets, or at least their street, is completely filled for blocks and blocks with giant TV screens every 3 or 4 blocks so that everybody can hear what's going on the main stage. And what goes on is this. The evening consists of a series of short 5-minute videos of the hostages with photographs from their life, sort of the kind you might see at a slideshow at a bar mitzvah, just put on a screen show just of pictures of them as young and old and whatever, pictures of their life. And then after showing that short slideshow, they invite the family member of the hostage, parents, spouses, sisters, or brothers, to address the crowd. And the stories and the words are actually very moving, and also, considering the situation, very sad. The crowd calls for action and for a deal to bring them home now. There's also another demonstration, only 2 blocks away, on Kaplan Street, which is so close that you can actually hear the shouts from one demonstration when you're at the other one. And that is a much more political demonstration, I would say, if it's possible to say that, aimed at calling for the Prime Minister to take responsibility for the failures of his government and his military, to resign, and to call for new elections. And that also gets about 50,000 people every single Saturday night. I think it's really amazing that Israelis give up their Saturday nights now for months. It's now been years almost since, because they were demonstrating before the war for something else, and take on Saturday nights to come and be together and to be in the streets. Some people go to one rally, some go to both, and some, split their time between the two of them. I suspect that most of us have never been in a country at war. Israelis, even as they are bitterly divided about many things, they see themselves as engaged in a struggle, if not for their existence, but definitely for their safety and their well-being. They all endured the Iranian attack on Israel last April 13th and 14th. They had about 12 hours warning. They knew that the missiles were coming in. And I don't think anybody slept that night, but rather people sat up all night outside and watched as hundreds of missiles came in over their cities and were intercepted by the Iron Dome defense system, literally over their heads. My brother-in-law, who lives in Jerusalem, says you could see those rockets exploding even over the Knesset in Jerusalem, if you could kind of fathom, imagine what that experience was like. In the northern part of the country, along the Lebanese border, there are rockets practically every single day since Hezbollah, which is the Iranian-backed Shiite militia sitting across the border in Lebanon, has begun their bombardment in what they call sympathy for Gaza. Since October, there have been over 8,000 rockets launched. Most of the people who lived within the 10 kilometers of the border have been evacuated for at least 10 months, and they make up a large part of the 90,000 people who are still internally displaced from their homes. But some residents have gone back, some go to tend their fields or their crops or looking on their homes. And even though many of the rockets fall on their fields, which are constantly being set on fire, others continue to hit buildings in kibbutzim and cities. And each time the sirens go off, anybody who finds themselves within range goes running to the nearest bomb shelter. They know where every bomb shelter is in every city and every town and every place. We in the States, I think, most of us are not even aware of the situation except maybe as a detail in a news article. But I want you to think for a moment what that does to your sense of security, day after day after day. People everywhere have apps on their phone, you're not surprised, that go off whenever the rockets come across the border and that show exactly where they've fallen so that people know who they need to call or check in on or see if everybody's okay. As I mentioned, my friends and I spent 3 days in the north. It's in the Galilee, but not quite as far north to be within direct range. And I will say that we were the only people staying in a very popular guest house in the old city of Nazareth, very, very close to the Church of the Annunciation, which is the traditional site where, according to the Christian tradition, Mary received the announcement that she was going to bear a child. Nazareth was like a ghost town. This normally bustling market was closed. Most of the restaurants had gone out of business. The few that were only open, let's say, from 7 o'clock at night for a few hours. In the 3 days that we were there, we saw one group of Christian pilgrims in a town that usually is jostling for place with buses and pilgrims. I honestly don't know how people are getting by. I have a story of my own. I call it my GPS story. Since the owner of the hotel was very gracious by not canceling our reservation, even though we were the only people there. I think he did so because my friends had stayed there a year or two ago and they knew him. But he left the building around 3 o'clock and just gave us his phone number and said, if you need something, call me. So we had the building to ourselves. But needless to say, there was no breakfast in the morning. And forget about breakfast, there was no coffee either. So my friends and I were contemplating where we would go in the morning. We had been told by the owner that there was a nice bakery not too far around the corner where we could get some busek, some Arab pastries, and also a cup of coffee. So, did what everybody does when you're traveling. You open up your Google Maps and you plug in Al-Baik, which is the name of the bakery. And I noticed, to my surprise, that it would take me 3 days and 3 minutes to get there. I was sure that something was wrong, but my friends explained to me that when the drones come in over the northern border, Israel has the ability to scramble the GPS for the entire region so that the rockets and the drones are not able to reach their targets. And so I looked carefully and I saw, and I will show you later if you want to see it, because I took a screenshot of it, that my location was at Beirut Airport. And that if I follow the directions on Google Maps, they had me walking through Lebanon, and then walking through Syria, and then walking into Jordan, and then crossing over from Jordan around Beit Sha'an, and then making my way to Nazareth. And I did actually send a screenshot of this to my family and to the office with the wry comment that if I did not get killed twice, once in Lebanon and once in Syria, I might make it to the bakery before it closes at 3 p.m. So the truth is that this happens all the time. And people in the midst of their driving, Uber drivers or people looking for a destination suddenly look at their GPS and they're placed either at Beirut Airport or I understand also sometimes at Cairo Airport. So you can imagine the disruption that causes. And it's a reminder, because whenever it happens, that a drone is coming across the border and that something may be happening. People speak about the war in the north as if it's inevitable because they cannot live safely in their homes on the northern border with Israel. Families who've been displaced now for 10 months are starting to wonder whether they'll be able to go back there for the start of the school year, which is going to happen in a few more months, and whether they'll be able to live on that border so that, well, if the war does escalate, let's put it this way, as everyone seems to think it will, then one of Israel's goals will be to push the people back from the Lebanese border so that the rockets will not be able to reach them safely. And I'm sure if that happens, we will all hear the howls of protest from newspapers and international human rights organizations about this barbaric action and innocent civilians who are displaced. But for the tens of thousands of Israelis who for the past 10 months have not been able to live in their homes on the border, the current silence about their predicament is deafening. And everyone also knows that this war will be a difficult war. Hezbollah is armed by Iran. The rockets that they are sending over the border now are not their full arsenal. They are sort of low-grade rockets. In fact, that's why some of them get in, because Israel does not want to be using up, I think their goal is to use up the reserve of the Iron Dome. But we all know that they have about 1,000 rockets that are able to hit targets within 10 meters. And I have no doubt that they would use them. So Israelis are now preparing for the electric system, the water system, public transportation, and those things to be disabled if this war goes forward. They definitely don't see the in-depth reporting about the situation in Gaza, which we see here in the press. Their coverage tends to focus on their own losses. About 300 of their soldiers have died so far, but neither are they unaware of the scope of the suffering there. The other day, there was a terrible piece in the news about the number of children amputees in Gaza who are the result of fighting and the bombings there. And I know that when my friends and others, read news stories like that, they are moved, perhaps shaken, even horrified by what's going on across the border. But as ordinary people, they feel helpless. They know that their ability to limit or control the way that the war is being waged is ultimately very small. Perhaps just as we in this country were not able to meaningfully affect the way that our military carried out wars it fought in our name in Iraq and Afghanistan, also among civilian populations, if we even cared to do so. And their reaction is also not as a defense, but just as a comment or out of frustration. They will say, well, this war could have been over months ago if only the hostages were coming home. I don't think that was true a few months ago, but I think by now, I think it's definitely true. There was enough disillusionment with the government, with the way the war is being fought, with the mounting death toll on both sides of the border, that I think it's true. I think that if the hostages were to come home, there would be a tremendous amount of pressure to end the war in some kind of a way, not saying that that would at all be easy. But they also hear stories that we don't hear, such as the one that was told to me over Shabbat dinner with a friend's daughter who had just finished her own army service. Friends from her unit were moving through a neighborhood in Gaza in a Jeep or an armored vehicle. And as they were driving along, a teenage boy on a bicycle kept coming close to them, circling them, riding in front of them and behind them. They shouted for him to go away, but he did not. And when they came to a certain intersection, the boy suddenly began blowing hard on his whistle, and within 2 seconds an RPG was fired on the vehicle. One soldier was killed, a second lost an arm, and the third had to be operated on because pieces from the Apple Watch of the second person were embedded in his face. When I heard that story, I did a little thought experiment in my own mind. What if they had fired on that boy and killed him? Can you imagine the story that would be in the New York Times? Picture of the dead teenager, the mangled bicycle, a mother's cries, her story, and then statistics about the high civilian casualties the Israelis are causing. But what about the story of the boy who a teenager too, even though he was a soldier, who was killed in the armored vehicle, and the one who lost his arm because they did not, at least in this case, fire on innocent civilians. Israelis hear stories like that, stories that complicate the narrative a little bit about what's happening in this war, but we don't. I left Israel a few days before my kibbutz was set to mark the 50th anniversary of its founding in 1974, which normally would be an occasion for a big event, time for inviting guests from Israel, from abroad, but they decided not to have the celebration this year other than a slightly bigger dinner, and instead they're going to do something small once a month over the next 12 months in the hopes that by then it will be possible to celebrate. And a friend told me that when she heard her son announced that he was getting married, she confessed that her first thought was, I hope they don't want to do it soon, because people are not able yet to celebrate even something like a wedding as long as the hostages are not home. And I will say that the future seems very uncertain. I know this seems like a big bring down, but hopefully there'll be a big bring up maybe later in a moment. The future is uncertain. They know that when the war ends in Gaza, that the wars within Israel about its present and its future will resume with even greater force than they're experiencing now. And people like my friends who worked for generations to try and reach and sustain an end to the conflict along the principle of two states for two peoples, they realize that this goal seems now quite far away. The hatred is strong. The trust is gone on all sides. The parties of the peace camp are small and divided among themselves, although I will say that 2 days after I left, for the first time since the war, there were mass gatherings in large stadiums in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem of all the members of these various peace movements, including politicians who are now retired, who were involved in the process in the past, who all showed up on the same stage together with Arabs and Palestinians to say, we are here. Sometimes my friends have a sense of being strangers in their own country as they've watched the rise to power of messianic zealots who speak in the name of a Judaism but who share none of their values, and by the depths also of the raw hatred that they saw expressed on October 7th, and that was filmed and documented. And yet they still believe, as I do, that there is no other solution and that the alternative is only the same path of more and more bloodshed. No matter how heated the conversations on this side of the ocean about Zionism and settler colonialism and what have you, any conversation that does not begin with the simple fact that Israelis are not going anywhere and Palestinians are not going anywhere is just a fantasy and an intellectual exercise. Despite this rather sad account, it was wonderful to be back, actually, in Israel, to see the way people came together to help and support one another through these trying times, and to appreciate their kind of dogged determination to defend the values that they have worked for and lived for. Even in the face of all this disappointment, people look with pride at what has been accomplished there, a nation that turned its face to the future after the most horrible of catastrophes, even if they have not yet succeeded at solving the most important question at the heart of their existence. I was going to teach you a song tonight, but I see it's getting late, so maybe I'll save it for another night. But it's a song that we've taught here before, and it's a song that was sung at the Havdalah service that I went to. And the words are by the Rav Kook, Ben Adam, Ale Lemala Ale. Ben Adam, which means person, human being, you. Ale Lemala Ale, ascend toward the heights, because you have the power and you have the wings to soar with, the wings of mighty eagles. Do not fail them, lest they fail you. Seek for these wings to raise up high, so they will once again be ready for you when you are ready. Rav Kook wrote these words He was an Orthodox rabbi, actually the chief rabbi of Palestine in the first part of the 20th century, but also appreciated the spiritual sparks and the constructive projects of the founders of Israel, those who came there not just fleeing persecution, but with a desire to create a Jewish society and a modern society based on the values of justice and egalitarianism, a respect for human dignity, and even friendship among the peoples of the land. So I think they sang that song, and they sing it every week at the Haftarah, as a way of affirming that there is a struggle going on right now, really for the soul of Israel, and encouraging people to keep believing that the human being and spirit is capable somehow of rising above the hatred, of the tribalism, of the fear, to a higher level and a higher way of being. So, I guess we can continue the conversation outside. If you have other questions or issues you want to ask me, I'd be happy to share a few more stories or things that I saw there. And I thank you for listening. And I tried to process many, many things that I saw and felt and heard while I was there. So we're going to begin to conclude our service with Aleinu, which is on page 586. And I invite you to rise. We were singing in the middle of the page. And we rise. Aleinu l'shabeach l'adon hakol, לתת גדולה ליוצר בראשית, שלא עשנו כגויי הארצות, ולא שמנו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם, וגורלנו ככל המונם, ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלך הקדוש ברוך. Page 391. 591. אמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו אחד. You may be seated. And our mourner's Kaddish is found on page 598. Tonight in our congregation we are marking yahrzeits for Peter Ball and William Bolsky, Mort Kaplan, Ruvain Chandros, Margaret Dewis and Jordan Green, Patricia Covell, Evelyn Levine, Ernest Levy, Harriet Marcus, Emma Milley, Helene Paselnik, Austin Schlecker, Genevieve Simmons, Bernadine Tucker, Larry Adams, Marion Kaplan, Carl Zoller, and we're still observing periods of Shloshim or Shiva for Barbara Cheknoff, sister of Michael. So I invite anyone who's observing a period of mourning or anybody who wishes to join the mourners to rise for the mourner's Kaddish, which is on page 598. Yitkadal, Yitkadash, Shemei Rabbah. Bialma, Divra, Chirute, Viamlich, Malchute. B'chayechon, Uviyomechon, Uvchaye, Dechol Beit Yisrael. Ba'agala, Uvizman Kariv, Vimru. Yehe, Shmei Rabbah, Mivorach, Leolam, Le'amei Almaya. Yitbarach, V'yishtabach, V'yitpa'ar, V'yitramam, V'yitnaseh. V'yitador, V'yitaleh, V'yitalal, Shemei Dekudusha, B'richu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechemata, da'amiran bi'alma v'imru, amen. Yehe shlama rabba min shamaya, chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru, Ose shalom bimrumav. Hu yaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imru. We ask the one who makes peace on high, send peace to those who mourn, and we all say, Amen. So tomorrow morning there's a traditional egalitarian service at 10 o'clock. I believe there's a Kiddush following, a special Kiddush. Yes. So if you come, you'll get a good lunch too. The second announcement is that on Tuesday, July 16th at 7 p.m., our social action committee is having a meeting to plan what we call a mitzvah day. Mitzvah day, something we haven't done for a long time at CBI, but the idea is that we're going to choose a day in September, invite everyone in the congregation to meet, and then we're going to fan out to different social action, social justice, and tzedakah projects in the community, where we can hopefully, with all the people working at the same time, make a dent in the difference. So we're going to pretty much exclusively be planning that. We need a lot of people to help plan that, a lot of people to make it work. So even if you are not on our social action committee, we invite you to come to this meeting, hear about what we're going to do, and then help us figure out how we can do it the best in our community. Are there other announcements? No. Okay. So for our closing tune, I want to do our Ladino version of Ein Kelohim. How many of you know this one? 0? 1, maybe 1. Huh? You know it? You sing it loudly? You will not. Okay. It's on page 600, and we'll learn it. It's not hard. It's on 631. Ladino, as you may or may not know, was the language of the Sephardic diaspora, those who left Spain, those who were expelled from Spain in 1492, who settled all over the Mediterranean as well as in Brazil and in Holland, and who spoke this sort of amalgam of Hebrew and Ladino. Yeah? No. That reminds me to thank Ander for being our web person today, and also those of you who are joining us online tonight. So, Ein Kelohenu, Ein Kelohenu, Ein Akadonenu, Ein Kemalkenu, Ein Kemoshienu, non como nuestro Dios, non como nuestro Señor, non como nuestro Rey, non como nuestro Salvador. Mi Kelohenu, mi Kadonenu, mi Kemalkenu, mi Kemoshienu, Ken como nuestro Dios, Ken como nuestro Señor, Ken como nuestro Rey, Ken como nuestro Salvador. No del Eloheinu, no del Adonenu, no del Malkeinu, no del Moshienu. Lo haremos a nuestro Dios, lo haremos a nuestro Señor, lo haremos a nuestro Rey, lo haremos a nuestro Salvador. Baruch Eloheinu, Baruch Adonenu, Baruch Malkeinu, Baruch Moshienu. Bendicho nuestro Dios, bendicho nuestro Señor, bendicho nuestro Rey, bendicho nuestro Salvador. Atahu Elohei, Atahu Adonai, Atahu Malkeinu, Atahu Moshienu. Tú sos nuestro Dios, tú sos nuestro Señor, tú sos nuestro Rey, tú sos nuestro Salvador. Buen sábado, good Shabbos. Now you're singing. There's more, is what you say. Yeah, please. You can lead next week. Let me say next week, by the way, just to remind you, we haven't put it out yet, but we're going to have hopefully a large Oneg and Kiddush to welcome Rabbi Ezra Leventhal. He'll be on the Bima next week with Cantor Sharon, and hope some of you come by to meet him next week as well. Please join us in the next room for Kiddush and Motzi and fellowship.